Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are opening the files on a brand new series we're calling Project Blackwood.
Yeah, and this is going to be a little different.
It is. This isn't your standard business review where we just, look at stock prices and quarterly earnings. We're trying to do something more like a forensic investigation.
Right, into the specific mechanics of how an industry giant, a real titan, didn't just stumble, but it completely fell apart.
Exactly. We're looking at the rise, the absolute dominance, and then the catastrophic collapse of Gateway Inc.
It's such a fascinating case study, and to be honest, it's a bit of a tragedy.
It really is.
Usually when we talk about tech failures, we're talking about companies that, had bad technology, or maybe they were way too early to market, like General Magic.
Or they were just outright frauds.
Right, that too. But the story of Gateway is different. This is a story about a company that seemed to have everything right. They had the branding, a beloved product, genuine customer loyalty.
A multi-billion-dollar valuation. They were a household name.
And yet, the very things that built them up, specifically that identity they crafted so carefully, became the structural anchors that just dragged them down to the bottom.
It's incredible. And to set the scene, I don't think I even need to say the name of the company for millions of you to know who we're talking about. I just need to describe one image.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
It's the mid-1990s. You come home from school or work, and there it is, a box on your front porch. But it's not a boring brown cardboard box. It's covered in black and white spots, Holstein cow spots.
The cow spots. It's arguably one of the most iconic pieces of branding in the history of American business.
Yeah.
You couldn't walk down a suburban street in 1995 without seeing one of those boxes out for recycling day.
No, you couldn't.
And it signaled something very specific to the neighbors.
It signaled that you were part of the future, you were getting a computer. We are, of course, talking about Gateway 2000. And looking back, the contrast between their peak and their end is just staggering.
It's night and day.
At their height, they were a titan, spoken of in the same breath as Dell and Compaq. They were the kings of the direct-to-consumer revolution. But the exit. In 2007, the company was sold to Acer for $710 million.
And look, $710 million might sound like a lot of money to us.
Sure.
But in the context of what Gateway was, a company that once did billions in revenue per quarter, that is a fraction. It's a mere shadow of its former worth. It was effectively a fire sale. They were sold for parts.
Which brings us to the central question we're going to try and answer. How did a company that basically pioneered the direct-to-consumer model, the model that everyone from, Warby Parker to Peloton tries to copy today, how did they lose their way so completely?
I think what we're going to find is that Gateway suffered from what you could call an ironic flaw. The Achilles heel wasn't bad tech. It was their commitment to their own bit.
To the cow spots.
To the whole package. The very thing that made them beloved. That high-touch, folksy, brick-and-mortar country presence was the exact thing that killed them when the market shifted to ruthless efficiency. It's this paradox of identity versus utility.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's start with Chapter 1, the Farmhouse Origins. And I mean that literally. This story starts in 1985, not in a garage in Palo Alto, but on a cattle ranch in Iowa.
Right. You have two founders, Ted Waite and Mike Hammond. And the location here is not some trivial detail. It is the foundation of their entire economic model. They founded the company, which was originally called the TIPC Network, in an Iowa farmhouse on the Waite family cattle ranch.
It sounds like a movie script. You have these guys surrounded by actual livestock trying to break into the high-tech world, but they weren't trying to build a new computer from scratch, were they? At least not at first. What was the spark?
They identified a classic underserved market, or what we might now call a stranded asset market.
Yeah.
They looked at owners of Texas Instruments computers. Now, TI had basically abandoned these users. They stopped supporting the hardware, leaving them with nowhere to buy peripherals or software. Waite and Hammond saw a gap.
Just a business sitting there.
Yeah, they realized, hey, nobody is talking to these people. So they started TIPC Network just to sell add-ons and parts to them. It was pure arbitrage, finding a gap between supply and demand that the big guys were completely ignoring.
And they had to bootstrap this whole operation. There was no venture capital flowing into Sioux City, Iowa in 1985. I absolutely love this detail from the records, the legendary $10,000 loan.
This is the kind of detail that makes the Gateway story so human, but also shows you just how precarious their start was. Ted Waite couldn't get a bank loan on his own.
Why not?
Well, the banks looked at a ponytail-wearing guy on a farm talking about computers and just said no. It wasn't the kind of business they understood.
So what did he do?
His grandmother, Mildred Smith, secured a $10,000 loan for him by using her certificate of deposit, her CD, as collateral.
Wow.
That was the seed capital. That 10 grand started an empire.
Imagine the pressure on Ted. You lose that money. You're not just answering to a bank, you're answering to Grandma Mildred. But they didn't lose it. In fact, they had this revelation moment almost immediately. In 1986, they pivoted. They changed the name to Gateway 2000. Why the shift?
They realized pretty quickly that just selling parts wasn't the end game. I mean, the margins on parts are okay, but the volume is low. The real opportunity was in assembling the PCs themselves.
Okay, so they move up the value chain.
Exactly. They began hand-assembling systems. And the growth, what we could call the market validation pace, was instant.
Yeah.
In their first year, revenue hit $100,000. By 1986, just 1 year later, it was $1 million.
That is exponential growth. And this brings up a really interesting point about their location. Usually, being in the middle of nowhere is seen as a huge disadvantage for a tech company.
Right. You're away from Silicon Valley talent. You're away from the supply chains.
But for Gateway, being in the Midwest was actually their superpower.
It was a massive competitive advantage. You could call it geographic arbitrage. It proved that rural overhead could absolutely beat coastal competitors on price. They didn't have the insane real estate costs of a company in California or Massachusetts.
They were paying Iowa rent,
Which is basically zero at the ranch, and Iowa wages. This allowed them to undercut the competition significantly while still maintaining really good margins.
And then came the branding. We touched on it, but we need to dive deeper into this Holstein identity. It was 1988 when they introduced the cow spot design.
And it wasn't just a quirky choice. It was a deeply strategic rejection of the status quo. In 1988, business computing was completely dominated by IBM, which was known as Big Blue.
Right, very corporate.
The whole image was men in blue suits, beige boxes, very sterile, very serious. Gateway looked at that and just went the complete opposite
It
direction.
was almost punk rock for the computer industry at the time.
It really was. Ted Waite later said that he didn't personally design the spots, but he recognized immediately that they humanized the technology. It projected these Iowa values, hard work, reliability, honesty.
So when you saw that cow-spotted box, it didn't feel like you were buying a piece of industrial machinery.
No, it felt like a gift. It turned the arrival of a computer from a technical installation into a domestic event. The whole family would gather around.
And that emotional connection drove this first massive growth spurt. They outgrew the farmhouse. In 1988, they moved to the Sioux City Livestock Exchange building.
You can't make this up. They're leaning all the way into the cow theme. It's brilliant.
And then in 1990, they move again, this time to North Sioux City, South Dakota. Now, I know you love the tax angles. Why South Dakota?
This is where we see the Midwestern disruptor really flexing its strategic muscles. The move to South Dakota wasn't just because they needed more warehouse space. It was a tax play, pure and simple.
Yeah.
South Dakota has no corporate income tax.
That is huge for a company that's scaling that fast.
It's massive. Every single dollar of profit they made could be reinvested directly into the company rather than being paid out to the state. And on top of that, they still had lower labor costs.
So in these early years, Gateway was actually a very lean company.
Incredibly lean. And this is such an important contrast to remember because later in the story, they become incredibly bloated. But in 1990, they are lean, mean, and very profitable. Revenue quadrupled to $275 million in 1990 alone.
So by the start of the 90s, Gateway has arrived. They're doing over $250 million in sales. They've got the brand, the low costs. This really sets the stage for Chapter 2, the golden era.
Yeah, the 90s were really the Wild West of the PC explosion, and Gateway was, for a while, riding the fastest horse.
In 1993, they decided to go public, the IPO. They raised $138.8 million. Why do that? They were profitable. Did they really need the cash, or was it about something else?
I think it was mostly about legitimacy. You have to remember, corporate buyers, the IT departments buying 500 computers for an office, were still a little skeptical of ordering from a mail-order company in South Dakota.
The cow spots maybe didn't scream enterprise ready.
Exactly. So going public, having that transparency, filing quarterly reports with the SEC, it legitimized them. It was a growth accelerator. It told the world, we aren't just some guys on a farm anymore. We are a major corporation.
And the numbers certainly back that up. This was the banner period. By 1997, net income, not revenue, but pure profit, exceeded $1 billion.
$1 billion in profit.
They had 15,000 employees. They were hiring executives from other major manufacturers. They were professionalizing the beast that Ted and Mike had created.
And this. This is where we reach the fork in the road. And if you take one thing away from this deep dive today, let it be this comparison. This is the pivotal moment where Gateway and Dell, who had been running these parallel races, started to diverge onto completely different tracks.
Okay, let's unpack the Gateway versus Dell dynamic. Because on the surface, they looked so similar. You call a number, or later you go online, you order a computer, they ship it to you. No middleman, no Best Buy markup.
Correct. Both were direct sales companies. But under the hood, the engines were completely different. Dell, led by Michael Dell, was obsessed with one thing and one thing only: supply chain velocity.
Right.
His model was make to order with zero inventory. They didn't buy the parts until you bought the computer.
Which is just genius because computer parts drop in price literally every single week.
Exactly. It's called negative working capital. Dell is using your money to buy the parts. If the price of a hard drive drops 5% on Tuesday, Dell can lower their computer price on Wednesday. But Gateway started to drift. They moved toward this idea of customer intimacy.
What does that mean in practice?
It meant they decided that to grow, they needed to be physically closer to the customer. So they launched the Gateway Country Stores.
Oh, I remember these stores so vividly. They were designed to look like a modern farmhouse inside. The reception desk was shaped like a silo.
Yes. They were showrooms. You could go in, you could try the computer, you could talk to a salesperson in a polo shirt. It was high touch. It was folksy. It absolutely reinforced the brand. But financially, it was a ticking time bomb.
Let's look at the metric that mattered here: operating costs.
This is the killer stat. By the early 2000s, Dell's operating costs were running at about 10% of their revenue. They were unbelievably efficient.
10%? Okay.
Gateway, their operating costs were hovering around 25% of revenue.
Wow, that is a massive gap. 15 percentage points. So for every $1,000 in sales, Gateway is spending $250 just to keep the lights on, while Dell is spending $100.
It's an insurmountable gap in a commodity market. When you are selling something unique, something special, you can have high overhead. But when a computer becomes just a commodity, when everyone's computer is basically the same on the inside, price is the only thing that wins.
And this leads us directly to the fixed cost trap.
Right. Think about it this way. When PC prices are high, let's say $3,000 for a good computer in the mid-90s, Gateway stores are fine. There is enough margin in that $3,000 price tag to pay the rent, pay the staff, pay for the silo debt.
Sure, the math works.
But what happens when technology gets cheaper and better? When that same computer drops to $1,000 a few years later?
You still have to pay the same rent. You still have to pay the same staff.
Exactly. The costs are fixed. Dell just updates their price on a website. Costs them nothing to lower their prices. Gateway has these massive structural anchors, all this retail real estate.
Yeah.
So as PC prices naturally fell, which they always do.
Commoditization.
Right. Gateway's business model became mathematically impossible to sustain against Dell. They had built a high-cost infrastructure for a product that was rapidly, inevitably becoming low-cost.
So they built a business model that worked great for expensive computers, but was absolutely doomed for cheap ones. And unfortunately for them, computers were destined to become cheap.
Precisely. They get against Moore's Law. And you never, ever bet against Moore's Law. That leads us directly into the crisis period.
Chapter 3. The turning point. We're entering the year 2000. The dot-com bubble bursts. The PC market saturates. Pretty much everyone who wants a computer now has one.
This is the market inflection. Sales are slipping across the industry. But Wall Street still expects that 90s level growth. They want to see those huge numbers. Gateway is now under the leadership of a new CEO, Jeff Whiteson. And the pressure to meet analyst expectations, it led to some very dark decisions.
This is the part of the story where we have to do some investigative unearthing. Because on the surface, Gateway still looked like the friendly cow company. But behind the scenes, there was some serious financial misconduct happening. Let's talk about revelation moment number 2, the subprime scandal.
This is really disturbing when you look at the SEC filings. In the second quarter of 2000, Gateway launched an outbound financing program. Essentially, they started cold calling people, or specifically targeting people who had been previously declined for credit.
Wait, hold on. So they were specifically looking for people who had already been told they couldn't afford a computer?
Yes. They were targeting high-risk borrowers. And the internal data, which later came out, showed that loan losses for this group could be as high as 50%. Basically a coin flip on whether they would ever get paid for the computer.
But they pushed the program anyway? Why?
Because it booked revenue today. That was all that mattered.
They were just buying revenue. They were shipping computers out the door to boost the quarterly sales numbers, knowing full well that half of those people weren't going to bid.
And look at the scale of it. By the third quarter of 2000, just 1 quarter later, these high-risk subprime loans made up 37% of their entire loan portfolio.
That is almost 40% of their financing business built on sand.
And they hid this risk from investors. They didn't disclose in their SEC filings that, hey, a huge chunk of our sales growth is coming from people who probably won't pay us back. They let investors believe this was organic growth from their traditional, reliable customer base.
That's bad. But it actually gets worse. There was another scandal involving AOL, right? The ISP bounty scandal.
This is revelation moment number 3. And it's a bit more technical, but just as shady. Back in the day, internet service providers like AOL were desperate for new users, so they'd pay computer manufacturers a bounty if a user signed up for AOL on a new PC.
Okay, I remember that. A free month of AOL.
Right. And the bounty was around $219.45 per user who signed up.
Okay, that seems standard for the time.
The deal itself was standard, but Gateway manipulated the accounting. The normal deal is, user buys the computer, user goes home and registers for AOL, then Gateway gets paid the bounty. But Gateway went to the ISP and renegotiated. They said, we want to book this revenue upon shipment of the computer, not when the user actually registers.
So they claimed the $219 bounty for every single computer they shipped, whether the customer ever signed up for AOL or not.
Exactly. And the SEC later found this had no economic reason other than to artificially inflate reported figures. It allowed them to pump up their Q3 2000 revenue by $70 million.
They were just pulling future possibilities into present reality to hit a number for Wall Street.
And when this all came out, the fallout was severe. SEC enforcement actions, restatements of earnings. But more importantly, the innocence of the Iowa brand was just shattered. They weren't the nice farm boys anymore. They were pulling the same corporate accounting tricks as the guys in suits they used to mock.
It was a total loss of soul. And financially, it was a disaster because once those subprime loans started defaulting en masse, all that fake revenue just vanished.
So the bubble has burst, the scandals are brewing, and the business is absolutely bleeding cash. This brings us to Chapter 4, the retreat and the failed pivot. It's 2001.
And Ted Waite, the founder, he comes back. He returns to the CEO role to try and save the ship. He sees the mess, and he initiates what can only be called the Great Retreat.
They basically pulled out of the world, right?
They did. They completely closed operations in Japan, Australia, Europe. They laid off 5,000 people. That was a quarter of their entire workforce at the time. They took a $475 million restructuring charge.
It's just tragic on a human level. But from a strategic perspective, what was the real consequence of leaving the global market?
This is a critical point that is often overlooked. By leaving Europe and Asia, they ceded scale to emerging giants like Acer and Lenovo. In the PC business, volume is everything. The more you make, the cheaper you can buy parts from Intel and Microsoft. By shrinking back to just the US, Gateway lost its purchasing power leverage. They voluntarily made themselves smaller while their competitors were getting massive. They entered a death spiral of purchasing power.
So they shrink the footprint, but they still need a new strategy. PCs are becoming commodities, the margins are razor thin, so they decide we need to go where the margins are.
And that's where we get the beyond the box strategy. They decided to pivot hard into consumer electronics, high margin stuff, TVs, cameras, MP3 players.
And specifically, the plasma TV. I feel like everyone I knew in 2003 either had a Gateway plasma TV or desperately wanted one.
It was the plasma TV gambit. In late 2002, Gateway released a 42-inch plasma TV for an astonishing $2,999. Now, you have to contextualize this. The market price for a plasma TV at that time was over $6,000.
So they came in at half the price.
That sounds like a great deal for consumers, but was it a good deal for Gateway?
This is the big what went wrong moment. It was an absolute disaster for Gateway. Analysts at the time estimated they were buying the raw panels, the actual screens, for about $2,700, and then selling the finished TV for $2,999.
Right, that's what, a $300 margin?
Less than a 10% gross margin.
Yeah.
And that $300 has to cover shipping a huge, heavy TV, marketing it, paying the staff at the Gateway Country store to sell it, and handling warranty returns if it breaks.
So they were losing money on every single TV they sold.
Almost certainly, yes. Or breaking even at the absolute best. A 9% gross margin isn't enough to launch a whole new product category. And this is the perfect contrast with Apple. Apple pivoted to consumer electronics with the iPod around the same time. But Apple built an ecosystem. You bought the iPod, then you bought the music on iTunes. Apple made money on the whole experience.
Gateway was just acting as a hardware reseller.
Exactly. They were just fighting a price war against the very same Asian manufacturers who were actually making the panels. Gateway was just putting them in a box with a cow spot, metaphorically, and shipping them. They had no unique technology, no competitive advantage.
And this led to product bloat, didn't it? They didn't just stop at TVs.
Oh no, they went crazy. At one point, they added 118 new products, digital cameras, MP3 players, home theater gear. It just diluted the brand completely. People were confused. Are you a computer company? Are you a TV store? And all of it distracted them from their core business, which was still PCs and which was still in trouble.
Which brings us to the final spiral, Chapter 5, the final Hail Mary and the end. It's 2004. Gateway is desperate, and they make a move that, to me, is the ultimate irony of this entire story.
The acquisition of eMachines.
Gateway, the premium brand, the anti-commodity brand, buys eMachines, which was arguably the cheapest, most budget bin, bargain basement brand on the market. They paid $262 million for it.
It was a humiliation, in a way. Gateway was buying them not for their technology, but to learn how to be cheap. They needed eMachines CEO Wayne Inouye. He was known as a ruthless cost cutter, a slash-and-burn operator.
And slash and burn he did. When Inouye took over Gateway, what was the first thing to go?
The country stores. April 9, 2004, he closed them all, every single one. 188 stores shuttered, just like that.
That is a brutal day.
It was the empty halls moment. 2,500 retail employees laid off in one sweep. But symbolically, it was the death of Gateway's soul. The physical connection to the customer, that farmhouse store, the friendly face, that was their main differentiator from Dell.
And by closing the stores, Gateway just became...
Another box pusher. They severed the artery that kept the brand alive.
But they had to do it to survive financially, right? The stores were bleeding them dry.
Oh, absolutely. They had no choice.
Yeah.
But by cutting them, they just became a less efficient version of Dell. They were stuck in the middle. They lost their identity to save their balance sheet, but without that identity, the balance sheet really had no long-term future.
And while all this retail drama was happening, they completely missed the biggest shift in the actual product market, the laptop leg.
This is the final nail in the coffin. In 2004, you look at the data. Gateway sales were 54% desktops and only 22% notebooks.
And the entire world was moving to laptops.
Rapidly. Students, businesses, everyone wanted portability. Dell and HP saw this coming. They pivoted their supply chains to build laptops efficiently. Gateway was stuck in the past, still trying to sell big desktop towers and those money-losing plasma TVs.
They were fighting the last war.
By the end of 2004, their market share had slipped to just 6.2%. They were fading into total irrelevance.
And finally, 2007 arrives. The end of the road.
The sale to Acer. The Taiwanese giant bought what was left of Gateway for $710 million.
Again, just compare that to the billions they were worth in the late 90s. It's a stunning fall.
It was a liquidation of the brand. Acer didn't really want Gateway's technology or its strategy. They wanted the retail channels, the relationships with Best Buy and other stores. And they wanted the eMachines brand to fight the low-end war, the Gateway brand itself. It was slowly retired. It became, as one report put it, a mnemonic for a specific era. Just a memory.
So let's bring this home. Let's move to the outro and reflect on all this. We've traced the arc from the farm to the fire sale. What does this all mean? What are the big lessons?
I think there are three major takeaways here for anyone interested in business. First is this battle between identity and efficiency. A great brand story, even one as powerful and beloved as the cow spots, cannot overcome a structurally inefficient business model.
It doesn't matter how much people love you.
It doesn't. You can be loved, but if your operating costs are 25% and your competitors are 10%, you lose. Period. The math always wins.
That's the fixed cost trap. Owning all those stores made them too slow to pivot. When the market crashed, they were stuck paying rent. Dell was agile.
Exactly. The second lesson is what I'd call the innovation distribution paradox. Gateway spent all their money and energy trying to distribute new things, TVs, cameras, instead of innovating on their core product.
That's a great point.
If they had spent all that plasma TV money on figuring out how to make the best, most innovative laptop in the world in 2003, we might still be using Gateways today.
That's a powerful thought. And finally, let's do a little what-if scenario. Imagine if Gateway had followed the Dell model back in 1997. Imagine if Ted Waite had looked at the stores and said, you know what, this is too expensive, this isn't scalable, let's close them now while we're on top and go full efficiency.
It's the great counterfactual, isn't it? If they had combined that Gateway brand, love the personality of the cow spots. With Dell's lean supply chain efficiency, my God, they would have been unstoppable.
They could have been the Apple of the PC world before Apple even made its comeback.
But they fell in love with their own retail strategy. They fell in love with the stores because the stores were fun, and they validated their brand ego, not because they made long-term financial sense.
And I see these parallels everywhere today. You look at so many direct-to-consumer brands. Peloton is a fascinating example. They start online, they have huge growth. Then what do? They start opening these fancy retail showrooms in expensive malls. And now they're struggling with high fixed costs and inventory bloat. It is the gateway dilemma all over again.
History doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. The temptation to open physical stores to build the brand is a siren song that has wrecked many, many balance sheets.
So we'll leave you with this closing question. In a world that is so obsessed with brand story and narrative, Gateway proves that story isn't enough if the supply chain and the business model don't support it. So which beloved brand today is actually a gateway waiting to happen? Which company do you love, but their business model is secretly eating them alive from the inside?
It's a question worth asking every time you see a cool new product or a flashy new store.
This has been a Project Blackwood Deep Dive. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.